to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged.
If you're listening to this, you are the resistance. The resistance.
We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America.
It's a trap!
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. If you've been watching Al Gore's Doomsday Clock, if you knew that in 10 years the world would be over as you knew it, you might not care what my next guest, or really anybody, including Al Gore, has to say. You'd just be partying like it's 1999. But if you didn't buy into that, if you weren't a climate cultist and you actually were thinking rationally, you might look at history and say, hey, you know what? There's actually a pretty moral case for fossil fuels here. Let's discuss it in more depth, which is why I've welcomed this gentleman to the show. Quick bio. He's an American author, energy theorist, and industrial policy expert, the founder and president of the Center for Industrial Progress, a for-profit think tank located in Laguna Hills, California. Nice choice, by the way. And a former fellow of the Ayn Rand Institute. Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Alex Epstein. Alex, how are you?
I'm good. Good to be here.
Hey, welcome. I saw you on Stossel, and I instantly thought I'd like to get to know Alex a little bit better and thank him for doing what you do. I saw you in the Climate March on YouTube, going out there with your banner, having people try to take it from you, and I thought, man, this could be Charlie Hebdo all over again. That's a dangerous place to hang out in the middle of all the climate cultists. How'd you get out of there alive?
Well, I don't feel very endangered. I mean, the United States is, I think, even much different than Europe in terms of safety, in terms of respect for individual rights. The People's Climate March, I think it was September 21st or so of 2014, it was about 100,000 people walking down the street with all these signs saying things like, hey, hey, ho, ho, fossil fuels have got to go. And as somebody who believes that we need to be using more fossil fuels, not less, if we want to improve our lives and the lives of billions around the world, I thought that somebody should take a stand. And so I brought my handy I Love Fossil Fuels shirt, and I made an I Love Fossil Fuels sign and stood in the middle of the crowd. And there was not much that's threatening. So I have a lot of confidence in the police. I also, I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That helps a little bit in terms of just knowing when a threat exists, but nothing serious came up. I mean, one guy grabbed my arm, and I just told him that we weren't going to have a conversation if he was going to play the touching game.
All right, so hold on. Let's back up a little bit. First of all, I love the fossil fuels shirt. I feel like I need one. And I feel like everybody needs one, because even if people don't like to admit it, like even during Occupy Wall Street, they're out there. You've got tents, you've got iPhones, you've got iBooks, you've got electrical lighting. Everybody kind of really loves fossil fuels, whether they want to admit it or not, right? Because they're 100% dependent on them. So how do you measure, or how do you square this whole fossil fuels are bad, I hate them, I want to get rid of them, flip the bird to poor people who can't get by without them, and oh, by the way, I'm 100% dependent. Like, that's always one thing that to me has been a little bit awkward. I'll give you a scenario. I was flying from the East Coast back home, and I stopped in Indiana, and what really sucked about this is Barack Obama stopped at the same time, so he can mess with your life like in unpredictable ways, and that was one of them. So I got delayed for 3 or 4 hours. But as I was leaving, and it's blanketed with snow, and it's sub-zero, and there's just nothing in every direction except for these bright lights and these people living in their warm homes and the food and energy and, fruits of life produced by fossil fuels. And that's kind of how it's always been in America. And I'm like, who would look at this and think this is going to end our life in 10 years, which is about a year from now, actually. So I'm scared.
Yeah, I was just watching Inconvenient Truth last night. It doesn't get better with age. So in terms of, there's this interesting relationship with fossil fuels because we use them 87% of the time. We use a machine to do anything. It's powered by coal, oil, or natural gas. And yet we condemn the fuel, and I'd say even more so we condemn the industry. There's a lot of reasons for this, but I think one is that we don't recognize the moral element that we are making a choice to buy the product of the fossil fuel industry, and that we do not have to make that choice. That is, you do not have to use natural gas to use your home. To heat your home, you don't have to use coal for electricity. You don't have to use a gasoline-powered car. The reason you feel like you have to, in most cases, is because those are so far superior to the alternatives that it would involve a great deal of suffering not to use them. But that's not a reason to condemn the producers for making you dependent any more than an Apple fanatic hates Apple for being by far the best computer brand in his view. So it's really a wrong thing to do. You have to decide if you think something is immoral, and in this case, we can talk about what they mean by immoral, but the basic idea is it's a planet-destroying addiction. If you believe that that's the case, then you have a couple of moral options. One is to not use it or use something else, and then the other is to try to produce something else on your own. But to say, I'm going to use it because implicitly I judge the benefits as outweighing the drawbacks, and yet I'm going to condemn the people who are making my life possible, that's an immoral position, and it's held very widely. So
just so you know, in order to prepare for this interview, I did something a little fun, and I Googled, I hate Alex Epstein, because that's when all the good stuff comes out, right? The people who, if you're succeeding by whether or not the right people dislike you. And I found a couple...
Yeah, I'm not succeeding enough, by the way. I'm waiting for more of that. I'm going to Google that.
Who are you trying to get on your radar that's not there yet? Who are you trying to get on your hit list?
The book that came out in November is The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, which is really the synthesis of everything I've been working on and trying to compile the whole big picture of, is it good to use fossil fuels or not? And is it good to use more fossil fuels or not? And what happens with that kind of thing is people expect, the environmentalists are just going to attack you rabidly, but they're very strategic. And particularly if the book is good and convincing, which people have said it's very convincing, they don't want anyone to know about it. So they keep silent. So they're starting to come out of the woodwork, but only because it's gotten so many positive reviews. But I want those environmentalists to have to grapple with it, to have to write reviews, or if better yet, some of them will agree. But one or the other. But that requires more attention. So every time you do a new podcast, every new article, every new person like you promoting it, it puts that pressure on them where they have to say something, and then they have to engage in it. And I think the public will find it. It's definitely in the direction of the case for fossil fuels. That's where the truth lies.
Yeah, it's funny that, my goal in doing this is, if someone's not really decided or if they want more information, they could catalog this show almost like it's an encyclopedia and go, a one about climate change. I'll listen to that. And they get to hear you as opposed to every single person who parrots, the Earth's going to explode if we don't do something right away because they have no historical perspective whatsoever. But I have a hard time hiding my bias because it's hilarious to me. Like, you go anywhere else in the world and you look at the way people live and you just make simple observations about why your quality of life is so much better than theirs. And there's a couple that stand out right away, but one of them is energy. Like, there's a consistent energy plan, cheap, affordable, quote unquote clean, which is a funny word too, clean energy. They would give, and in some cases they have given everything just to have a taste of the amount of quality of life that we have. And then you have people here who want to take that all away just to make themselves feel better. Like, what am I missing here?
Yeah, now in practice, as you indicated before, they don't want to take it away from themselves in most cases anyway. And if they did, I think that would be even more immoral. Like, I like the hypocrites more than the consistent ones in a certain way. Like, it's, in effect, I think my problem with Al Gore is not that he takes a private jet and, demands a personal helicopter and demands a running SUV at all times for whenever he wants to escape, into the cold after a climate conference. That's, contradictions there. But my point is that what's wrong with him is that he wants us all to take actions that would make us live in the equivalent of mud huts. So I wouldn't be happy if Al Gore lived in a mud hut. I'd rather we all get to the level where we can have private jets. And that's what pursuing an energy future will mean. So I actually forgot that point. It occurred to me. I've been thinking about Al Gore lately because I just watched this movie. But what was the original question?
I was just talking about the, it's, you mentioned when people don't want to bring attention to it. Like, it goes with a lot of things. When I'll debate people, I've always said this, people always say you shouldn't talk about politics or religion. And then I'm never shocked to find out that most people can't speak intelligently about either. And that goes for a lot of things like, you can't judge. Alex, you don't know what they've been through. You can't judge. I'm like, why is it in a society when we tell people they can't judge that we're surprised that so many people exhibit poor judgment? And so with fossil fuels, it's very much the same way. You hear the same things parroted all the time about clean energy, about saving the planet, about climate change. I'm in this plane and I'm looking down going, everything that you see here is a result of fossil fuels. Everything. The plane I'm on, the shoes I'm wearing, the emergency hatch, the slide that'll come out if I pull this lever right here, and everything on the ground that makes people happy, fossil fuels. So what kind of a pompous hypocrite, like, non-intellectual does it take to go, fossil fuels are bad, and then try to convince everybody that it's true with their hockey stick graphs and what we're learning every single day is a very, very fake science. And I could get into one of my favorite things is bashing on Instagram. And I always hear, You can't argue with facts, even if scientists are corrupt, even if they're crooked, even if they were motivated by something other than the truth, it's still factual. It's facts. Like the world is going to end if we don't stop using fossil fuels. And I'm thinking, what would life be like if I was this easy to convince of things that make absolutely no sense whatsoever? So tell us how the book addresses some of those issues.
Well, one aspect of your question that I think it's important for listeners to note is just that you have a very detailed understanding of the role of energy, and in particular, cheap, plentiful, reliable, scalable energy in human life. So you're tying it to your own experience in a very concrete way, including the uses of some of these energy forms, namely oil, to make different kinds of plastic and synthetic products. Now, most people do not have that, and when I went to Duke University, I didn't get anything like that, and part of why I got into energy and was passionate about it is because I was upset that I had never really learned about it. So you can't think intelligently about anything unless you consider both the benefits and the risks. But if people don't realize how fundamental a benefit energy is, one, and then how superior fossil fuel energy is to the alternatives for most purposes, then then they're in the situation where there's nothing to lose by opposing fossil fuels. So it's just win-win. So when they compare fossil fuels to solar and wind, it's not cost-benefit to cost-benefit. It's pure cost in the case of fossil fuels, and then pure benefit in the case of solar and wind. Well, that kind of equation will completely distort your thinking, and that's what happened. You have these effectively useless sources of energy that are viewed as morally heroic, and the actually heroic sources of energy and the people who produce them viewed as villains by the people kept alive by them. So that's what bad thinking will do, and lack of education.
It is funny when you talk about when your thinking changed. I have a similar experience because I wasn't super into politics, but this question always bothered me. I was on a date with a girl who's like, yeah, I don't talk about religion or politics. Like, I just don't do it. And I'm thinking, wait, why not? She goes, I just don't. It's bad manners. I'm like, well, all right. I know a little bit about religion, not a lot about politics, but I asked her a couple simple questions and she had no clue. And I thought, I wonder if everyone suffers from this. Like, it's impolite to do it, so I don't do it. Therefore, I know nothing about it, and I'm resigned to live a life of being totally in the dark. Probably she thinks the world is going to end next year too with Al Gore. But my thing was it by design that someone told people not to do these things? And I think the answer is yes. And I think you hear a lot of that with climate change. Now, the reason I brought that up is you were reading about it in school, and you got very involved in the climate discussion, or you wanted to know more about it. What spurred that? Was there one instance where you had a light bulb moment, or was it just something that caught your attention and you ran with it?
Well, so my basic orientation, certainly as a kid and through teenager, and in terms of my strengths academically, was always math, science, computer science, that kind of thing. So I had a very strong respect for science, and I went to a special school that was designed to train young research scientists. And both the media and my teachers, at least the ones who spoke up about this, were unequivocal that there was this big global warming problem and that all scientists supported it. And they were similar about the other two addiction arguments that fossil fuels are an addiction. One is it's causing catastrophic resource depletion, one is catastrophic pollution, and one is catastrophic climate change or catastrophic global warming, which I think is a little bit more accurate way to put it. So with the global warming thing, what was interesting is when I was 16 or so, I read a book by B.J. O'Rourke called All the Trouble in the World. And he had some just really interesting statistics. I didn't even know if they were true. But just, for instance, refuting the idea of overpopulation, which I had just been taught as a kid. This is obviously a problem. And it has this logic to it that if you don't know anything makes sense. Like, well, people are having more and more kids and there's only so much food, and then we're going to run out of food, right? This kind of Petri dish type or carrying capacity type view. Now, many people have made a living and a career based on this view, which is completely fallacious. And he also had some stuff about global warming. I don't remember the specifics, but I remember being introduced to Richard Lindzen and Pat Michaels, just their work, which were two very well-respected climate scientists Lindzen being basically a legend, who were questioning this. And that just opened my eyes to, wow, there are different views here. And I was never particularly dogmatic about believing in it, but now here's a real controversy to get to the bottom of. Now, I'd say I didn't really pursue that rigorously to the point of having a deep understanding of it until 10 plus years later, but I certainly was suspicious of this idea. Well, all scientists agree, and certainly any element of who are you to question. People who ask that question are people who don't have good answers to your questions.
The debate is settled, and I will not. Science is settled. I will not debate client deniers.
I will not explain how it was settled. I won't explain so I won't explain the conclusion. I won't tell you exactly what I mean by climate change. So I can mean a mild climate impact or a catastrophic one, depending on whom I want to fool at any given time. And I won't explain the reason. Like, you ask anyone who says, my colleague Eric Dennis, who's a physicist, will ask the question, if somebody says, well, they've proven that this is catastrophic climate change, says, oh, great, how did they prove it? Nobody ever has.
The models, the computer models.
They don't even know that. But then it's like, okay, how did the models prove it? By
the Pentium,
predicting everything completely wrong?
No, when the Pentium 5 chip came out, the models got redone, and then it was settled. The science was settled. Is that right? I think I heard that somewhere.
But in terms of, there's a lot of really interesting terminology issues in this whole debate, and my background ultimately became philosophy, and that's what I became obsessed with, and still am obsessed with, and a lot of that's using proper terminology. And one thing I'm always on the lookout for is if the wrong side, or the side that I think is generally irrational, has introduced a term, it's almost always not the way to think about it. So, for example, the idea of the science, there's this dichotomy of the science is settled versus the science is never settled. Now, I don't think that's really right, because there are aspects of the law of universal gravitation that are proven, that are demonstrated. I mean, you can talk about exactly how much, but beyond a reasonable doubt, there is a real understanding. And to equate that with the predictions of climate prediction models that can't predict climate, and to say, well, they're both unsettled, that's to devalue the genuine knowledge. So I think there's this idea of, you're a skeptic or a believer. Skepticism has a certain, you should be skeptical to the extent there's not evidence, but ultimately you should be pursuers of knowledge. So I don't think of myself as a skeptic. I'm someone who pursues knowledge. And thus, when someone comes up with a theory that has been invalidated by reality and doesn't explain reality, I'm not a skeptic. It's just wrong.
Yeah, I think of one time I was arguing with someone about a lot of stuff, and it wasn't going well for that person, but I remember them throwing out the term flat earther. And I thought, here's another interesting one. Like, flat earthers back then, which people were they? They were the ones who had settled the science that the earth was flat. Like, there was no debate. It was flat. It was proven. There was evidence. And if you went too far, you'd fall off. And all of a sudden, it just wasn't true anymore. And I thought, any settled science is not, like, any scientist will tell you that the science is never truly settled. And I go into certain examples. I mean, even at the molecular level, are there things smaller than molecules and atoms? No, of course not. Actually, there are. And it gets much smaller. And I have to assume.
Well, I think it's tricky, because part of what it means to establish knowledge is that you recognize the boundaries of what you know and what you don't know, and where there's room for inquiry. But I think it's not like, even if you just take like a basic kind of physical fact, like all things being equal, if you drop something, it will fall. Like, there is real knowledge there that is different from saying saying, hey, if you put a certain amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, it will cause runaway global warming and a climate catastrophe. Like, the first one is validated by evidence, by understanding of physical laws. The second one is a butchering of something that's real, the greenhouse effect, and drawing this totally false implication from it that is completely contradicted by reality. So I'm very wary of that. Like, nothing is ever settled. Certain things are settled as long as we have the right version. I don't talk in terms of settled. I mean, there's proven, there's established, but the point is that what these guys are claiming has very, very little evidence for it, and lots of evidence contradicting it. So it is not settled because there's not the evidence. That's the reason.
All right. So you talked about them changing terminology. I think this is huge. Like the war on language, there's the war on women, and then there's the war on language. And I'm trying to decide which one hurts me more personally, because I love women and language. But, there's some certain terms, like for one, I think they made a huge mistake with global warming, because global warming eliminates so many possibilities of the agenda and narrative that you want to throw out there. At what point, who decided that global warming was not going to be used anymore and they'd switch to climate change? You're the expert. Tell me how that happened.
That was an explicit decision. I think the conference was in 2005. Now, the term climate change has been used for a long time. I mean, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, was established in the 80s. But in terms of the dominant usage, climate change, I think in 2005 was a turning point, and even with Inconvenient Truth in 2006, you sort of see it bridging that. Now, I talk in the book about one of the things that I try to do in the book is just define everything really precisely, which I think is almost completely absent from the discussion. So the alleged causal relationship in the theory is that putting increasing the amount of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, or CO2 in the atmosphere, from 0.03% to 0.04%, which is what it is at now, maybe to 0.05% eventually, that is going to cause runaway global warming, which will then, the warming will cause all of these things in the climate. But so it's the climate change, or the catastrophic climate change, is the alleged result of warming. But that's ignored in today's debate because there hasn't been really any warming in about 20 years. So that because the warming prediction was invalidated, they went to the climate. But the climate depends on the warming. So it's just completely dishonest. So what they do is they just do this classic primitive religious or primitive people approach of, hey, there's a bad weather event, let's blame it on, our particular devil. And if it's good, let's credit, our God. So in this case, whenever there's good weather, it's nature gets the credit, and whenever there's bad weather, fossil fuels get the blame. But there's a complete failure to look at big picture trends, or even to look at, is this claim consistent with what the theory, is this even coherent within my own false theory? And no, it isn't.
It kind of reminds me of, who was it? It was a few months back when, what ends up happening is when Al Gore goes to give a speech, or when they have a climate summit, like they get really, really extreme weather in the wrong direction. Or I think, it's God's way of manifesting his sense of humor, and we all laugh, where Gore will show up for a global warming speech and there'll be 3 feet of record snowfall that day. But I remember it happened a few months ago. I don't remember the instance, but one of the guys on the news, probably at NBC, sent out tweets, is like, stop calling it mother effing climate. It's weather. Weather and climate are not the bleep bleep same thing. And I thought, well, yeah, it's true, but we only hear that speech when it goes the wrong way, like when the needle's pushed in the wrong direction. Like they're the same thing unless it doesn't help the cause, which is really something that's bothersome to me. Do you have any other examples of that in your book?
Well, I'm tempted to, I'm just going to quickly see if I can search for it, because I wrote a tweet on that. I think it's a great topic. I wrote a tweet on it that I was very proud of. The fun thing about Twitter is you get to try to put these things in very compact form. But the basic idea is that, weather, and there's this distinction between weather and climate, which is a whole subject of how much of a distinction there actually is. But that distinction only exists when it's weather that isn't consistent with, when it's cold weather when you'd expect warm weather, as you put. So you say,
Twitter's great unless you're on the other side and you're like that guy or Anthony Weiner, and you have to constantly figure out how to delete your tweets and get rid of the screenshots. But I see your point.
Yeah, well, I have different code of conduct with my tweets than he does. So what? Sorry, what was the question about what was it? Examples of what?
Examples of, I just remember that one particular guy because he had to take the tweets down, and it was this implied expletive-filled rant about how climate and weather are not the same thing. And I thought, I've heard there's been so many instances where this rant could go the other way, but you only hear it when people are mocking the climate cultists because of circumstances surrounding, when it's supposed to be warm and it's cold, when there's supposed to be a record blizzard in New York and snow hardly falls and things like that. And they get really perturbed about being mocked when that happens.
Here's an interesting perspective. I could argue, I think convincingly, that there's no such thing as climate. So how can I say that? Well, because climate is an abstraction. Climate is an averaging of weather trends over time. So, but in reality, all you ever experience in your life, the reality that you deal with and that will benefit or harm you, is weather, right? You deal with a particular storm. You deal with, water when you want it, water when you don't want it, cold when you want it, heat when you want it, or the opposite, right? You just experience weather. And the reason this is important is because we're taught to think of climate as this mystical, scary entity that, if it changes, we can't possibly cope. And yet, if you realize, well, no, these are just different gradations and varieties of weather, you realize 2 things. One is that naturally, climate and weather are against you. They're not trying to help you. I mean, they're not trying to hurt you. I mean, they themselves, the other species are trying to hurt you. but they're indifferent to your well-being, and they're incredibly hostile to life. And I'm in New Haven right now. If I go outside, I discover that very quickly. I was in Boston this weekend, and discovered it even more quickly when I had no hat or gloves because I don't own them because I live in Southern California. Just realize, oh my gosh, with even these clothes, 45 minutes here, I'm the opposite of toast. Right? I'm frozen. It's such a danger. Weather is so dangerous, except if we have technology to negate it, or to maximize the benefits of the good parts and to minimize the drawbacks. And then you get to, what do we actually need to deal with weather? Well, we need a whole lot of technology, which means we need a whole lot of energy. So in practical terms, you get the point that nature doesn't give us a safe climate that we make dangerous. It gives us a dangerous climate that we make safe. And if you think in terms of weather, that's obvious. But the use of climate and the fact that it has this woozy meaning to people makes them ignore that basic reality. And thus, in the name of safety from weather, they deprive us of the means of keeping ourselves safe from weather, namely fossil fuel energy.
I think what you're saying, if I'm more of a simpleton, what you're saying is that climate actually used to be very opposed to how now climate's going to end the earth. It's kind of like Gaia blew this bubble around the earth and she could pop it at any time, like if we piss her off.
Yes.
But what actually happens is, like a lot of things in life, because non-thinkers lack this historical perspective, is they can't see 50 or 100 years ago when climate literally was life and death. Like if you're a farmer and there's a freeze and it ruined your crops because you live in a regional geographic location, that could mean your kids would starve to death. Like if you got snowed in and couldn't get outside of your driveway for a couple of days, you could die right there in that house. Kind of like when Bloomberg mismanages New York during a blizzard and they don't plow the snow and people die in hotel lobbies. Like that's real. That's reality. And so actually, I think you touch on this in your book. Talk about the amount of people that climate used to kill regularly. Like it was just a part of life. It's like how people didn't name their kids till they were a year old because the mortality rate was so high. This isn't just in black areas of, high population democratic cities. This was everywhere because of mortality rate. So talk about the danger that used to be climate before fossil fuels became mainstream.
Well, I never do what I'm about to do, but I want to point out again that you're coming to this with an unusually high degree of knowledge, which is a good thing, which I think that people should really observe and try to emulate. So before we had the issue of you have a very concrete idea of energy, and then you're also focused on having a historical perspective on things. That's come up several times, and then you have a concrete idea of what the world has looked like. I think that so many of our problems would be resolved if people just had a detailed historical knowledge of man's relationship to the rest of nature. Just even 500 years, like go back. If you get that, most of today's environmental mythology will fall apart, because the basic environmental mythology we're taught is that the broader version of what I said about climate, that nature gives us this perfect planet and then we ruin it. Now, anyone who actually lived in nature absent massive human transformation knew that this was false, because their kids were dropping like flies, and they were as sick as dogs. But that's the natural state of things. Nature gives us it's basically resource poor and threat rich. And it's only through massive amounts of human ingenuity, creating machines, creating the energy to power them, that we can actually make the world amazing. And the world is amazing. Our environment today, we shouldn't view as unnatural. It's an amazing expression of human nature, which is using the mind to improve the world around us. That's what's unique about man-made things. They're made by the mind. So incidentally, people who are against, quote, artificial things are against the mind. So against man-made means against mind-made. But I think that the perspective that you have is as a perspective people should seek to get. I want to understand historically, hey, what was it like before fossil fuels? And then you'll be rid of this Disney-esque view of environment, and then I think you'll really appreciate the benefits that fossil fuels bring, and any kind of risks or side effects, and any new technology brings those, will be put in the context of, wow, they're sort of curing this natural disease of a very hostile environment. If they add and introduce any new problems, okay, but we'll deal with those using technology. But to remove this massive environmental improver can't be the solution.
I was just thinking back when you were talking about how much it bugs me when you watch, the real kicker is when you're watching a movie about the Middle Ages or medieval times, or even Disney movies, they romanticize the period. Like take Take Game of Thrones, for instance. Like, it's a lot of good looking people doing, naughty things, but when they're in Croatia, it all looks beautiful. And except for a couple places, it'd be a pretty cool place to hang out. Whereas in real life, like your life expectancy, 25, mud and feces everywhere you look, like kids don't live. Half of your kids have no chance of surviving. Pre-fossil fuels. That's your life. What am I missing?
Well, I think that other people are missing what you have, which is just a historical context, and then possibly some measure of justice and gratitude to the people who've actually changed that. I'm looking for. I have a friend, a professor named Pierre Durocher, who it's hard to spell, but unless you're French Canadian, but it's DESROCHERS.
Thank goodness I have fossil fuels and I'm not French Canadian. Go on.
Yeah, but he has a book called The Locavores Dilemma, which is really good on this kind of local green food thing.
It's called the what? I want to get this in the show notes. The local what?
The Locavores Dilemma.
That sounds French
like
Canadian too.
Locavore, like the omnivore is eating both meat and vegetable, and here it's the locavore. It's the person who's eating only locally. Anyway, if you want to talk about historical context, you got to be friends with Pierre or interview him. I mean, he's been on my podcast at least twice. He's so much fun to interview. He's like a roller coaster encyclopedia of fascinating facts about the past and about human living standards. And he's always just saying that when we talk about the Middle Ages, people think about like Lord of the Rings. So that reminds me of the Game of Thrones.
Oh, totally.
And it's just so. I'm laughing, but life today is, and everyone should keep this in mind, conservative, liberal, whatever. Life today is so good. I mean, there's a lot of things wrong, but the opportunity that you have to flourish and pursue happiness today, you shouldn't want to trade that for any other period in history. And so much of that, the foundation of that is those allegedly evil oil executives and coal executives who are figuring out a way to deliver a continuous supply of food to our machines. Just like we need food, our machines need food, but our machines use 100 times more energy than we do, which means somebody has to figure out how to give them at an affordable price 100 times more energy than we use. And that's an amazing achievement, and that's what the fossil fuel industry is really good at, and that's what, leaving aside, I'd say, nuclear, which has really been constrained in an unfair way, which could do a lot of that, at least in terms of electricity. The other industries are not up to the task. So why blame it on the best? Blame it on the people who can't equal them. Nobody's forcing you.
It's so true. Like, you think, and realistically, like Charlemagne, the richest, most prominent man who ever lived on the planet, he didn't enjoy the things, he couldn't conceive of the things that the Obama phone girl, from YouTube enjoyed. Like, his life in some ways can't compare to hers. And it's funny you mentioned Lord of the Rings, because where's the coolest place in the Lord of the Rings movie? Like, if you could live anywhere in that movie, where would it be?
I couldn't make it through the first one, I have to say.
Okay, so you're not a fan. I'm not a huge fan, but I'll tell you, they romanticize like the Elven city, where all the elves are, right? Well, first of all, it's weird. It's like this metrosexual vibe where the men and women all look the same, including their ears. So that's weird, but they're still attractive people. They're just kind of like this asexual, androgynous society. But they don't pretend that any of those places run. Like, the Shire might run on the turning water wheels, but the floating city in the clouds and Star Wars and Star Trek, like, they don't pretend any of those things run on sun and wind. Like, they pretend that today, even though there's no evidence of it anywhere, except, what do people say? What about Europe? What about Europe? They have wind power there. But it's all nonsense. Like, even in the movies and the best places to live, they have some mythical energy source that's not like the stuff that we're trying to turn the clock back to use, like the 11th century power source of wind and solar. But they don't even pretend. It's just something we haven't invented yet, which will come as a result of us pushing fossil fuels to their limits, not digressing and turning backwards. To me, it's hilarious, aside from the fact that everything should be dirtier in the Lord of the Rings. Like, we should all live like the orcs, basically. Where did that man come from?
Again, it was pretty fun to listen to. The 11th century thing is another example where historical perspective helps. I mean, it's funny to hear, except that it's tragic to hear, like, essentially a windmill, although it's, technically a wind turbine, but to see that heralded as the future when the basic problems with that have existed, since you've tried to harness energy that way. Namely, the wind is a very dilute energy source, so per unit of area it doesn't generate much, and then it's an intermittent source, so it can't give you power on demand, which is what you need for the vast majority of your power. So sure, if you just can only grow a little grain in the first place, if you don't have fossil fuel agriculture, you stick it in a windmill and wait a couple days and hopefully the wind will blow and you'll grind some grain. Okay, fine. But this is different from running a hospital, and your mother has a respirator and you want to make sure that thing is on, or everything else you need power on demand for. And the reason why, and the point about fossil fuels is important, that the way you get new technologies is by always being on the premise of using the best. So I call this in the book progressive energy. That's that when I fuel my tank with gasoline, I'm not doing it on the premise of renewability or sustainability, which I actually think are bad ideals. I'm not doing it on the premise because those really mean repeatable. Let's do something we can repeat over and over. Well, that's not what humans do. That's not what capitalism is. Capitalism is always finding a better way to do something. So when I use gasoline, all that means is, hey, the guys who are offering me gasoline, they can come up with the best solution now. But I'm not committing to doing it in 50 years or saying my grandchildren should do it. They should use whatever the best producer can be. Now, that also might be a liquid hydrocarbon like gasoline. It might be some form of advanced nuclear power. It seems unlikely that it's going to be any solution that comes from the wind. But the point is, let's always do the best and we'll always get the best result. The environmentalist policy is, let's ban the best, force ourselves to use the worst, and hope for the best.
Now, you've gone against some of the naysayers, some of the people who don't buy into this whole crazy right-wing nut job climate denial thing that you've obviously bought into. I don't know if you're a lobbyist or what, but here's my question.
Yeah, I like climate denial as a term, by the way. You deny what? The existence of a climate?
Yeah.
I mean, these terms are so loaded.
Look around, Archimedes. It's everywhere. It's like the Force. You're a Padawan. Yeah, it's hilarious. But here's the thing. Here's one thing I actually don't understand. Like, if you're a politician, I get why you lie about a lot of things. I know what funnels power back into the coffers. With the climate, I am unclear on some things. All right. My brain needs to go over some global warming in the Cortex region. Why some politicians are so married to the idea? Is it just the dirty money that comes from the subsidized boondoggles? Because really what they're doing, and maybe I'm answering my own question here, they're setting people back who believe that they care about them. And they do that in a lot of different ways. But with the climate, what is the end game? Like, the people who are all bought in, is it, in your opinion, is it just about financing their dream? Is it about the prestige, the Brian Williams, hey, humble brag syndrome? I mean, at the top, if someone is pushing this narrative and it is untrue and the things that we're saying are true, what is in it for them in the end?
Well, I think it's helpful to just look. So there's motives that are specific to politicians, but I think there's something more universal. So I just ask you the question: well, why for so many Americans is it very compelling for them to believe that their way of life is causing this catastrophe? And if you even challenge that, it's almost that they want it to be true, right? Like, I've given evidence, for instance, I'll give evidence about, hey, you know what, we're told that climate's becoming more dangerous, but if you actually tally the number of people who die from climate-related causes like extreme heat, extreme cold, storms, etc., those deaths are actually down 98% in the last 80 years. I never have had one environmentalist or environmentalist inclined person who's even cracked a smile at the possibility of that. You'd think they'd be happy, right? Like, oh, wait, wow, I thought there was a disastrous trend, but it turns out, at least so far, it's really, no. So that's my question to you, TJ. Why do you think that so many people are inclined to believe it's true and even sort of want it to be true?
Okay, I have an answer for this, actually. And it's going to sound like we planned this, but we didn't. This was totally random. I came up with a theory, just a thesis, and I call it Crosswalk Theorem. Have you ever heard of it before?
I have not.
All right, that means I actually might have made this up on my own, and which is a big deal for me. The Crosswalk Theorem is this: when you go to a busy intersection and the light turns green and someone's in the crosswalk, occasionally they'll speed up and they'll run fast and they'll get out of your way. But occasionally they will slow down and pretend like they're not enjoying making you, like, having a power over you. And so every time this happens, I think, man, I should run this person over, but I can't do that. I am subject to their will until they decide to get out of my way. And so then I make observations about the person in the crosswalk. If you're at an intersection, the person in the crosswalk is the most powerless, meaningless, invisible person there, unless they're exactly in front of your car in the crosswalk. So what's the point of all this? I'll tell you, if you are that person and you feel that way about yourself, it gives you instant meaning and instant power. And you need that, you need it to stay. It can't be fleeting. So for those brief 5-6 seconds they're in front of my car, they own me. They're my entire world because I can't do anything without their permission unless I want to go to jail. And so my theory for this, and you see it in a lot of different areas, is if that person suddenly feels like they are significant, like they matter, like they're Jamie Foxx in Spider-Man 2, right? It's like they see me, they realize I'm here, like I'm making a difference. You're going to latch onto that and you're going to run with it despite all the evidence to the contrary, because everyone needs to feel that they're important. The more important they are, the better. And if you can save the planet, like if you're important enough that what you're doing is causing Mother Earth to cry oil-induced tears, then that's something. And why not, right? Crosswalk Theory.
I just like I love the example of Electro from Spider-Man 2, because of course these people's distinctive ability is to not generate electricity.
Oh man, back to the drawing board. I totally missed that. Good grab.
No, but so yeah, I think there's a lot of dynamics here. I think that's a psychological dynamic. I think if people read Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, there's really good explanation of this psychology of envy that goes on, where people who feel inferior, and there are many reasons why people feel inferior, but the people who are rich, successful, good in the physical world, those are the types of people who tend to be the source of envy. And fossil fuel industry is all of those, right? It's this highly physical industry. Successful people, but also like coal miners, people good with their hands, which often intellectuals like me are, feel inferior in the face of. I wouldn't say that of myself, but anyway, that is a common type of thing. And what is really convenient is if somebody gives you an idea that says, hey, those people that you feel inferior to, you're actually better than they are. They're actually evil. Like that is a very psychologically convenient moral code. It's like collectivism is appealing to people. It's like, those really successful individuals in society, well, they actually have no responsibility for their success. You have responsibility for the success because you're the group. And really the group means everyone who's not successful. So it's always interesting to know who is an idea psychologically convenient for. But I'd also add that there is a very deeply embedded idea that to be good, environmentally speaking, is to not impact nature. And in moral case, the root of it is really there's two approaches to our relationship to the world. We are either on the premise of we want to minimize human impact. We want to save the planet from human beings, which is what we're taught as the ideal in school. Or we want to maximize human well-being. We want to improve the planet for human beings. And since I was 18 and learned this distinction, I've been just so passionate about we need to improve the planet for human beings. I'm a humanist. But the idea of not impacting things has become morally popular. It's called being green. You're considered good now just if you reuse you don't throw your towels on the floor in a hotel. That's what passes for being a moral citizen these days. Or if you recycle. It doesn't even matter if it's efficient, if it makes any sense. It's like as long as you're allegedly not impacting things, that's good. Well, that's a morality that then makes us biased against any industry that actually has a big impact on the world. And it gives moral superiority to people who don't impact things, which means that they don't do anything. So it's this moral premise, which is then psychologically appealing to people. That combination makes a lot of people attached to it. And then you have all these political incentives. But I think that's the core of why, for, say, Barack Obama, this is such an issue, even though it's not particularly politically popular. It's certainly not a political priority for people. But it's so connected to his pseudo-self-esteem.
It's funny because the hotel I was staying at last week, they got rid of those signs that you always see, like, hey, if you want to do your part to help Mother Earth, make sure you pick up your towel and hang it up when you're. I'm like, wait a minute, that's what you pay the maid to do. No way. So what I typically do is I take all the towels except for the one I'm going to use the next day and I throw them on the floor and get them all wet. But I'm not saying people should do that. I just wish the hotel would tell me the truth. Like, why don't you just say why you're doing it? Don't pretend.
Let's pause on that for a second, though, because think about what is actually the harm of that. Like, thanks to modern human ingenuity, that does a negligible amount of damage. The only thing it really is what a lot of damages or a lot of costs is, it just takes a little bit more human labor. Everything ultimately boils down to how many man hours does it take. Like there's an infinite amount of matter in nature practically, but we only have so much time in our lives. We only have so much time to do work. So what you've done there is incredibly trivial. And yet people would say, oh my gosh, that's evil. Like how could you do that? And they would feel good themselves for, well, at least I'm, hanging the towel up and I'm going to be, I'm taking one for the team. And what's interesting about it is it's obviously stupid in terms of the scale of it. The scale of it makes no sense in comparison to, say, the scale of deciding to build a hotel or to go to a hotel, which is a massive transformation of nature and an incredible luxury for human beings to avail themselves of. So it's kind of obvious that this makes no sense even on the scheme of non-impact. So what it is ritualistic. It's a religious ritual. It's like buying an indulgence, but it has no scientific. It's just one piece of evidence. It's not a scientific movement. Scientific movements don't involve doing rituals that have no significant impact on the alleged goal, but cults do involve those rituals.
It really is true. Like before, my wife contributes to global warming every day. She's smoking hot. But before I met her, I probably should have done something like a trivial exercise, like worn a climate impactor button and then just gone up and down the hotel room when I was bored and walked into people's rooms and thrown all their towels on the floor and said, let's see if the earth notices. Because honestly, this is my other problem. Like I remember a couple of years ago, a comet entered the atmosphere or a meteorite or whatever it is at that point. Do you remember that Russian dash cam video where like they almost had to call Bruce Willis and have him come drill this thing in half, although it probably would have been too late because the comet actually it did a flyby, grazed the tower, so to speak. Do you remember this?
I don't.
Okay, Google it. They got some dudes in Russia, probably in Crimea. I'm sure they're long gone by now, but they actually caught a glimpse of a meteor coming through the atmosphere. And I thought, all right, two possibilities. The government knew about this and didn't tell us, or the government had no idea. And I actually lean towards the latter. They probably had no idea, which is why I laugh when they claim they can predict weather 100 years from now, even though they can't predict it in 2 days. Meanwhile, this freaking comet nearly took out Russia and probably the rest of the world, and we didn't hear a peep from anybody. Because think about it, Rahm Emanuel would have not let that go to waste. He would have jumped all over that crisis, but I heard nary a word. And that, to me, is just more proof that they don't have a friggin' clue what they're talking about. And with that, I also want to say something about people who resent the successful. They envy the people who have more and who have done more. I want to do a little segment where we talk about some of the really stupid arguments you hear for climate cultism. But one of the things I did, one of the first times I got in an argument with someone and I didn't really know much about the topic, well, not that that doesn't happen, but in this particular case, they said, oh, the Koch brothers, they're so evil and they do so much harm in the world and they're lobbyists and like they're, Republicans want to kill people. And I hate the Koch brothers. Honestly, at the time, years ago, I didn't really know much about them. I just kept hearing their name all the time. And I thought, there's got to be a reason people hate these people. So what did I do? I went and bought a book by one of the Koch brothers and I read it. And it was called The Science of Success. And I'm a big entrepreneurial fan, but it was interesting to me that one of the first chapters talks about the Koch brothers' dad setting up oil rigs in the Midwest and the government basically coming and trying to confiscate their property. And I might get some of the details wrong here because it was a long time ago, but they had a decision to make and they were essentially forced to leave the United States of America to pursue economic freedom in Siberia, where they could drill without the government, like basically taking over the fruit of their labor. They went to Russia to get away from the government. And then once they had figured out all the secrets and learned how to, learn their trade to a degree where they really were good at it, they came back to the USA and now they own one of the largest private companies in the world. And I got to the end of the book thinking, these guys are brilliant. And they had the government on their back the entire time trying to take away what was rightfully theirs. And to me, that told the whole story. I'm like, until I hear a really good argument about what the Koch brothers do that's so evil from someone who doesn't know what I know about them, I can't really take them seriously. It's a good book. People should read it. But the U.S. government was after them, and they still are to this day through their acolytes. So it's a pretty sad state of affairs.
And the one thing to ask about, the Koch brothers are involved in Koch Industries, which is one of the most successful companies in the world, and either the first or second largest private company. And combined, they're worth, I think, about $100 billion. So combined, they're the richest person in the world. What's interesting, so you'll hear all these accusations about, well, their company did this and their company did that. As you would imagine, there's any huge company over a period of 50 years, someone at that company will have done something wrong. But really what it boils down to, the accusations are, what do the Koch brothers do? They basically do two things. they refine oil, and they promote liberty. That's a pretty good thing, and they are very, very effective at both, particularly refining oil, and they're trying to be effective at promoting liberty. And I think if you look at the work they do, it's good. And my main thing would just be figure out how to do it even better, because we're definitely not promoting liberty well enough in this country right now.
You talked earlier about why I believe what I believe, why people do things, and there's actually a line that was in American Sniper when he talked about the character playing Chris Kyle's dad talked about, the wolves, the sheep, and the sheepdogs. And I actually had someone put it another way on my podcast. He said, there's only 3 types of people in the world. There's the wise, there's the foolish, and there's the evil. So I think what I was asking you really is, what are the evil going to gain from putting this over on the foolish while fighting the wise?
Doesn't that question answer itself?
For people who are smarter than I am, yeah, for sure.
So say it again. What do the evil have to?
I'm repeating. You already answered this earlier, but I'm repeating it because I want people to remember that there are 3 types of people. There's the wise, there's the foolish, and there's the evil. And the thing you have to figure out when you're being fed a line is, which one are you talking to and why are they doing what they're doing? And typically it's the foolish. That's mostly what we see with global warming, whatever pejorative you want to call them. But I'm fascinated by what the evil ultimately will obtain aside from power by pushing this lie that the planet. Here's the thing, talked about it earlier. You remember that tsunami? I think Brian Williams was actually there covering it. He was knee deep in water at the time when it hit Phuket. Yes. And I mean, yes, he's on a jet ski, just getting it on his GoPro live footage. I don't think that those jokes will ever go away, by the way. I remember thinking, so here we're saving the earth, right? I'm using 1 towel a day instead of, 2 a week. I'm using natural dye-free laundry detergent. And here the earth sneezes or, has an itchy nose and 10,000 people die that fast. So why do we have this arrogance to believe that the earth gives a flying crap what we're doing here? Does the earth even notice us, Alex? You're an expert. Tell me the truth. Does she even know that we're here?
There's a lot of interesting things about this tsunami example. One is that 10, 20,000 people die because of this, because of the nature of nature. This happens sometimes. And yet what gets all the blame? The nuclear power plant. So the man-made structure that actually saves many, many lives is given this. That's what people equate. They think all these people died in tsunami and there was a nuclear power plant, and there's this juxtaposition that then becomes causation. All people died because of this nuclear power plant. So it's interesting that even in the case where it's just unaltered nature that's the cause of something, people are still looking at the man-made as guilty. And this gets to the point about, evil, the evil and the foolishness, I believe, are both made possible by a certain philosophy, which is that it's wrong for man to impact nature, that nature apart from man is perfect, and that we should just refrain from altering it. And my view is no, to survive, we need to alter it dramatically to meet our needs. But if you can instill that premise, which I'd say is an evil premise, that man shouldn't impact his surroundings, then what does that do? Well, that enables evil. If it's an evil premise, it enables people who want to stop human beings from acting, who want power. It's the premise that gives them power. And then in terms of fools or the population, if everyone believes that, their thinking is going to be all muddled, and they'll always think that the evil person is pursuing an ideal. And you can see plenty of parallels with this with dictators throughout history, like the communist dictators. The ideal was viewed as collectivism, the group over the individual. And the leader was saying, well, look, we need to take drastic actions in favor of this. And the population, the fools, as you might call them, didn't really want to do that necessarily, but it was satisfying the ideal. So they capitulated to it, or they supported it. They couldn't see another way to go. So the ultimate way to deal with this is to have a different ideal. And so my ideal here is humanism. We want to maximize human well-being, not minimize human impact. And if we have that as our ideal, then then fools will cease to be fools, and the evil will cease to have power.
Alex, it's been awesome, man. I'm really happy that you wrote this book. I'm excited for it to come out on Audible, because that's that's my jam. So you said it's done recording, right? When does it actually launch? Because I think I'm going to give out a copy on my dime.
All right. Well, it comes out on February 24th. It should be available on, I imagine most people will get on Audible. It's technically out from Tantor Audio. That's TAN TOR, and we'll link to it at moralcaseforfossilfuels.com, which is where, for those of you who don't just listen to books, you've been able to get one for the past couple months and check it out at moralcaseforfossilfuels.com.
Outstanding. And where can they find you on Twitter if they want to debate all these backwards ideas that you have, all this troglodytish nonsense that you spew?
Well, you can follow Bill McKibben. It'd be good. No, my Twitter is at Alex Epstein. So Alex and then EPSTEIN. And also people might like on Facebook. I have a page, but there's also a more active page called I Love Fossil Fuels, which is one of our most active pages. And that's a really fun page where people post all kinds of stuff.
Hey, I'm just curious, before you go, as someone who hasn't done the media circuit, like I know you were on Stossel because I saw you there and it looked like a lot of fun, but you've been on several other places promoting the book. Is there one you particularly enjoy more than the rest? Like if I ever get climate famous and I'm out there truth telling and doing the gig, like where do I want to go first? Where's the best place to stop and why?
Well, Power Hour podcast with Alex Epstein, obviously.
Good plug.
But besides that, no, that would be fun. It'd be fun to have the conversation. It'd be fun to ask you the questions about Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, and just to have you come up with analogies all day. That would be very entertaining. But I've been on the gamut. Stossel I enjoy for many reasons. Stossel had a show. It was either in 2000 or 2001, and it was called Tampering with Nature, and it was all about this idea of, are you improving the planet for human beings or saving it from human beings? And he really defended this idea of tampering with nature. And I remember 10 minutes in, I just was, oh my God, this is amazing. And I was in my parents' house at the time because I was still in college. I think it was during the summer. And my sister says, what are you doing? I was just so enthused. And so I told him the story. I've been on the show 3 times. The first time I was on the show. And so imagine, you grow up really admiring someone and then you get to be around them. So that's fun, and John also, he asks good kinds of devil's advocate questions. So that's definitely up there. I think it's always, you can always make it fun. The only thing that's annoying is, people pull tricks on you. You need to just learn how to expect that. So one thing is just with the time, people say, I've heard, oh, you have 20 minutes, and then they cut me off after my second statement. So then you got to learn every time you're on TV. Every sentence is your final swing. So otherwise, you never know when you're getting cut off.
Good to
and
know.
Don't do pre-taped interviews.
I would ask you who was the worst, but I don't know if you're allowed to get in trouble or not or incriminate yourself.
Who's the worst TV interview?
Yeah, where's a bad experience? Where would you say, you know what? Don't go here. Stay off Rock Center. They might try to lick your butt.
Yeah, it's all about, my belief about these things is that, I go in a lot of sticky situations, it's all about your own mental preparation for any situation can be a good situation for you. You just have to be mentally prepared for best case and worst case scenario. So with the time, it's my fault. I took them at their word about the time, but that, you have to know that can change. But yeah, anytime I get heated or something like that or angry, I know that, something was off in my preparation. So I don't think of any of them as bad. I just think of it as, you have to get good. And the number one rule, particularly if you're contrarian, is be calm. Never lose your cool under any. People ask me, how do you keep cool under these circumstances? The answer is because I know there's a camera there. I'm a fairly calm person, but even if I wasn't, I know there's a camera there. I know what it looks like to get agitated on camera, and I want that to be the other person, not me.
If I had it queued up, I'd play Bill O'Reilly going, we'll do it live. F word.
Yeah, I'm not going for that. And you could get away with it much more when you're the host.
Totally. Hey, so I have one last question for you. I appreciate you putting this book out there. I'm excited to read it. I think people should go out and buy a copy for themselves and get educated. And just this whole synergy that you're putting together between people's minds and their thermometers, it makes a lot of sense to me. What's the next step? What's the next phase of your life going to look like? What are you tackling next?
Well, in a sense, this is part of a broader phase. I've been really into this issue concretely of fossil fuels for the last 7 years. And I don't consider it over at all. This has just been a really good vehicle to clarify my own thought and to create a go-to resource that I think is a rapid way for people to get up to speed and a very effective, I call, mental magnet to move other people. So I'm really focused right now on promoting the ideas by promoting the book. I speak probably speaking 40 or 50 times a year, are on pace to do that this year. So, I mean, I think it's important if you create something that is just a really good resource is to get it deployed. So we work on getting it deployed to students, work on getting it deployed throughout industry, getting deployed in media. So that's, and a lot of what I do is I'm very interested in the synthesis of content and marketing. So I think if you work as hard as I do to try to get the content exactly right, you really should make sure that you get it distributed effectively. So I spend a lot of time on that. I'm very interested in the business side. Other than that, though, the broader issue I'm really interested in is an issue where fossil fuels is just one aspect, which is the issue of humanism versus anti-humanism. And one way to think of that is we have a deep bias in our society against anything man-made, right? Natural, which means non-man-made, is the ideal. So basically anything in nature that the rest of nature creates is good, anything that we create is bad. So we have a bias against the human race, and I call that human racism, and that's going to be one of my next books.
Hashtag human racism. Oh, that is going to drive him crazy. I love it. I love it. Well, Alex, it's been a joy and a delight. I'm excited about what you're doing, like I said before. And when this house of cards inevitably falls, which it will, I look forward to seeing you on top of it with a big oily hammer in your hand or whatever you're going to use to topple it down. Thank you so much for joining us, and good luck out there.
All right. Really fun. Thanks, TJ.
You're listening to the absolute unadulterated truth, courtesy of the Oh Hail Yeah Show. Want more? Oh. Hail yeah, you do.
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to the Young Cons podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud. And make sure to check us out online at youngcons.com/podcast. Or chat us up on Twitter at RealTJHale.